this, and 7 generations of my family have worked there. And so occasionally someone will ask me, what's the secret to being a 7th generation company? And I typically say, well, it's simple. You would have had to have started a really long time ago. So we're in a number of businesses. One of them, which I think is the craziest of them all, is that we grow pine trees. And I think it's a crazy business for 2 reasons. First of all, the only thing you have to do to grow a pine tree in Maine is nothing. You just have to be willing to do it for a really long time. Do you have any idea how long it takes to grow a pine tree in Maine? It takes 80 to 100 years. So this is the part that makes 0 sense. We've been in business since 1848, and we've had 2 crops. It makes no sense. I have a good friend on the other side of town who owns a farm stand. And I stop in there every fall, and she has pumpkins, and corn, and potatoes. And I'm like, you mean you plant those in the spring and you harvest them in the fall? What a great idea. I think I'm really happy to be here, first of all, and honored to be here. And I love this industry like you do. And one of the things I love about it most is there are so many different ways to go about being successful. And I think perhaps the one word that links us all, or that unites us all in this industry, regardless of where we're from or what type of company we have, is the word adaptation. Every company here has developed the ability to adapt. That, I think, is our common thread. You've adapted to your place, and you've adapted to the time, and you've been able to change and evolve while staying true to your core values. When we talk about adaptation, however, we most often talk about adapting to customer expectations, which is obviously super important. But what I would like to talk about this morning is the importance of adapting to employee expectations. We all know that customer expectations are evolving rapidly, but I think that employee expectations are evolving even faster, and that our ability to adapt to a new set of employee expectations could actually be even trickier and more challenging and more critical to our long-term success than keeping up with customers. So this is Ray, my friend Ray Laurinaitis. He is the caretaker extraordinaire of our planer in the sawmill we have in Bethel. And I love what he says here. And the goal goal, I would say, of our company is to have all 500 people who work there feel, in their own words, like Ray does. So what I want to talk about this morning is the idea, well, is an idea, first of all, because everything starts here as an idea. I want to talk about the idea of creating an employee-centric company. An employee-centric company in which the first focus of the company becomes the people who work there. That becomes the first focus, the people who work there. And that the company becomes a place where everyone can lead, grow, feel trusted, empowered, valued, and heard. And a company in which organizational excellence is achieved through honoring and celebrating the individual human spirit. So about a year ago, I was on the Navajo reservation learning about the Navajo tradition of peacemaking and the Navajo philosophy of K apostrophe E. And what I took away from that experience is you could sum up Navajo culture in 2 words: relationship and responsibility. So the Navajo believe that everything that lives, has lived, does live, or shall live is related and connected. The Navajo believe that everybody in this room is actually related, that everybody you will meet in Philadelphia is related to you, that everyone you will meet between now and the last day of your life is related to you, and that the divisions we've created to separate us are artificial human constructs. They're not real. There's one tribe, and everyone on this planet is related. What a cool idea. And then the second component of Navajo culture is responsibility. You have a responsibility to that which you are related. You're related to everything you see, and you have a responsibility, therefore, to everything you see. I thought that was cool, really cool way to see the world. So that night at sunset, I was walking alone in the desert when I had a bit of a epiphany. It was a 5-word epiphany. In nature, power is dispersed. In nature, power is dispersed. I got looking around at the sunset scene, and my business mind crept in, and it said to me, "Where's the capital of the desert? Take me to the headquarters of the desert. I'd like an appointment with the CEO of the desert. Which one of these cactuses is in charge of all the other cactuses? Where's the king cactus?" In nature, power is dispersed. The power of the desert lives in every piece of the desert, and there is no capital, and there is no CEO. Every piece shares responsibility for the desert. Humans who are a part of nature, not above nature, ultimately aspire to organize in this same way. That is where the arc of humanity is headed, towards a model of leadership that disperses power and shares responsibility. So I have a second book coming out next year. In one of the chapters, I travel to London to interview a gentleman by the name of Jose Miguel Sokoloff, who's a Colombian-born advertising executive who was hired a decade ago by the Colombian military to come up with a marketing campaign to help end the 50-year guerrilla war in Colombia. The military hired an advertising executive to think about how ideas, not just guns, could get rebels to put down their arms, leave the jungle, and come home. So I was sitting having breakfast with Jose when he said this quote to me that we all have a belief system, and without one, we would have no ability to cope with or make sense of the world. I have introduced mine to you, but now I want to just give you a little more context into how I acquired that belief system, because I didn't always have it. I spent quite a bit of time in business thinking maybe the purpose of business was to prove my own worth and success. And it took some pretty significant events to shake me off that path. The first you all know about, when the housing and mortgage market collapse of that began around 27 in the 4 years that followed in Maine, housing starts fell by 66%, and our sales fell by 50%, essentially, without losing a customer. In 2010, at the peak of that collapse, I began to have trouble speaking. So when I would go to talk, all the muscles in my throat would spasm and squeeze and contract, which, by the way, I do not want you to worry about, because it was actually perhaps the single best thing that ever happened to me, and I wouldn't trade it in for a moment. So don't feel bad for me or worry about my voice. It was a huge blessing, and I love it. It is my voice. It is my voice. And it was a gift. But from a management standpoint, I quickly had to lead differently because I couldn't talk all the time. And I laugh about this now, but at first I said to myself, well, what good possibly could a CEO be that can't talk all the time? But when you can't talk all the time, you start developing strategies to get other people to talk more. And the simple strategy is you ask lots of questions. So here's an example of how it played out for me. Someone would come to me at work with a question or a problem. I knew I wasn't going to be able to give a long answer, so I would listen and simply say something like, well, that's a good question. What do you think we should do about it? And that employee would say what he or she thought, and if it was at all reasonable, which it essentially always was, I then said, well, that sounds good, let's go do that. And off he or she went with his or her solution to his or her problem. And at first, this was not any kind of revolutionary management strategy. I was just trying to protect my voice. But after doing this for months and then years, a couple things dawned on me. First of all, people already knew exactly what to do. They had great answers already. And they didn't need CEO-centric solutions. They just needed a little encouragement or confidence or trust or reinforcement. So then in 2012, I started traveling to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the southwest corner of South Dakota. And I won't go into that story today, but essentially, it is a beautiful place filled with beautiful people, but it is statistically the poorest place in America. And there I encountered an entire community that did not feel heard, that felt forgotten, marginalized, taken advantage of, and left behind. My belief system So 5 learnings for me came from those experiences. First, as someone who'd always led, I came from an established family. I was always a manager. I, for the first time in my life, knew what it actually felt like to not feel heard. And then second, at Pine Ridge, I came to realize that in this world, living a life, there are lots of ways to not feel heard. And then third, one might say, the very purpose of life is for an individual to find and authentically live through his or her own true voice. But historically, across time, leaders had probably done more to thwart and hinder the authentic voices of others than to liberate and encourage them. And eventually it hit me that what I had originally thought of as a disorder was actually a gift and an invitation to be different and to lead different. And then I got this idea I could not shake about what if we could create organizations where everybody led and everybody felt heard. How cool would that be? Not just economically, but like socially. For humanity, how cool would that be? So that led me to some really big questions. And this is, I think, one of the important points. It wasn't just all of a sudden about getting up and selling more lumber. Of course we're going to do that, and of course we want to be good at it. But I started to think about bigger questions that are way, way, way behind, let's sell more lumber. So I started thinking about this question: what's the purpose of work in the 21st century? Like, why are we even doing this? And on the simplest level, I concluded that work, the purpose of work, should be to add value to the lives of the people who do it. Let's make that the purpose of work. But then that led me to an even tougher question. So if the purpose of work is to enhance life, then you'd have to consider the purpose of life in order to consider the purpose of work. So what's the purpose of life? So now I'm up there in Casco, Maine, in a rundown lumber company office, thinking about the purpose of life, which led me to an unprovable conclusion. So it's not meant to be anybody's truth but mine. It was my conclusion. The purpose of life is to self-actualize, for individuals to self-actualize, to come into their own authentic voice, to be heard as you are, not as someone expects you to be or thinks you should be or wants you to be, but as you are. And I love that quote on the bottom from Picasso. The meaning of life is to find your gift. And the purpose of life is to give it away. And the mission of a company should be to facilitate this for the people who work there. So that brought me back to work. And what I've concluded is that the planet is actually in an organizational slump. And statistically, I think that is proved out. So in 2017, Gallup polled 100,000 American workers, 33,000 of which said they were into their company and their work, and 66,000 said they were not. 50% described themselves as not engaged in their company or their work, and 16%, I get a kick out of this, even though it's not funny, described themselves as actively disengaged. They were so disenchanted that they were going to screw it up on purpose because they were so uncomfortable with the experience. Gallup went on to talk about the economic cost of this, which it put at $450 to $550 billion annually. And if you factor that out globally, it's $2 trillion. Globally, you can only find 15% of people who work on the planet who define themselves as being engaged. And there are 2 billion people who work, of which 85% are not engaged. So you can look at the economic cost, but what I got looking at is the social human cost of a short life and how much time is spent at work. There are 160 million workers in America, 120 million full-time workers. The average work week is 47 hours. The idea of sacrificing at work so I can live and be me and be free on the weekend, on vacation, or in retirement is in the 21st century an unacceptable bargain. Maybe in the Industrial Revolution that might have flown, but not in the 21st century. So why this across the planet high level of employee disengagement in their work experience. To me, the answer became quite simple because of my frame of reference. It was simple. It's because they don't feel heard. It's because they don't feel authentically heard. And they don't think anybody is really listening. So in summary, I think the planet is in an organizational slump, which is an exciting opportunity to be in organizations because we can be the ones that help bring the planet out of that slump. And I think it's in a slump because people are increasingly looking for something more meaningful in their own life. But organizations are still highly absorbed in themselves. Think about this on an individual level. How do you feel about individuals who are consumed with their own performance and results? Well, how would you feel about an organization that's consumed with its own goals, performance, and results? Not that those things are unimportant, but how would you feel about an organization that's consumed with them and puts everything else second? So individuals, you can look at this a bunch of different ways. The Aquarian age has dawned, the age of the internet, the speed of transportation. Individuals are coming into their own power. But organizations for centuries have collected power in their capitals. The 5 big institutions, I think, the family, the school, the place of worship, the place of work, and the place of government, have all centralized power. As a child, you spoke when spoken to. The father was the head of the household. At school, we sat in alphabetical order and memorized. And you can take that all the way up through. And all of those organizations have spun a narrative that's very different from the Navajo view, have spun a narrative that power lives out there, somewhere else, away from you as an individual. So I see a super cool, super exciting opportunity for lumber companies to lead the way and flip this script. The old model was about power to the center, and the new model would be about power to the individual. Now, I talked about this a little bit already, but this is not new wisdom. Rudyard Kipling, the strength of the pack is the wolf. I spent a lot of time at Pine Ridge on the Northern Plains, and so I know a good bit of the history. In the second half of the 19th century, the great father in Washington, the president, would send negotiators out onto the plains to make treaties with the Sioux tribes, and the negotiator would show up and say, "Take me to your leader." And culturally, in Sioux culture, nobody actually knew what that meant. They're like, what do you mean by that? Surely no one leads all of us. Surely no one speaks for all of us. Leadership is a responsibility that everybody shares. And if you get looking at many of the indigenous rights of the Sioux, you'll see the power of the individual reinforced time and time again. The Vision Quest rite is one simple example. In the Vision Quest rite, you were expected to leave your tribe and journey alone into the wilderness in the hope of catching a deeper glimpse into your own true voice, the essence of what makes you you, what inspires you. And if you were lucky enough to receive a vision, the Lakota term is hamble chia, which translated means to cry for a vision. If you were lucky enough to receive a vision about what inspires you, you then came back to your community and stood before the entire circle and shared what you learned about you. And you were then expected to live your life in keeping with that wisdom or those values or those objectives. And the idea was simple. If every individual was strong, then the tribe would be strong. So I kept, in this presentation, moving this slide up. I had it at the end, and I kept moving it up. Because I don't want people to worry about a false outcome here. So what I'm talking about is not anarchy. And what I'm talking about is not chaos, when everybody shows up whenever they want and leaves when they want and do what they want and develops their own systems. Obviously, that wouldn't work, and that's not the point. The point is something very different, and it's simply this. People are more apt to support things that they help to create. And that a deep commitment to group goals and systems and best practices and strategies and priorities is actually best achieved by creating space for everyone to be authentically heard. If a single united voice was the key to productivity, the Soviet factories of the 20th century would have led the world. They collapsed under their own weight as an extreme example of this. When the boss gets so determined to have his or her way that no one else is heard, that's not consensus. That's just everyone throwing up their hands and getting quiet. That is not consensus. And so what I believe and what I think we are finding at Hancock Lumber is we actually can create heightened discipline and heightened enthusiasm for systems and attention to detail, and doing it a united way by engaging everyone in the process of discussing what those goals and systems should be. Statistically, this path is rising. I spoke to a group of county commissioners in Maine last week, and I showed them this data set. What does this data set suggest to you? It's pretty obvious, right? The closer the government entity is to you, the higher your confidence level is in it. The further away that source of power is, the lower the confidence becomes. We are entering an age of localism where power long collected is going to be dispersed. The only question, there's no question except which side of that curve does a leader or a company want to be on. And leaders can do a lot to either speed this up or to slow it down, but it's going to happen, I think, all the same. So in our model, as a result, this becomes the purpose of work. It's to help the people at work find their own true voice and self-actualize. So then we've got to actually do that. So it's one thing to talk about it, and what I feel really lucky about with my voice condition and the learning that it brought my way is I don't mean this negatively, but I wasn't a professor in the corner office, and I was actually like if I thought this was true, I could actually go try to do it. And that has really been my focus and our focus. And what we concluded, having worked on this now for over half a decade, is that to create a culture where everybody leads, 5 big things need to change. The mission, the metrics, the processes, the leaders. The leaders don't have to leave. They just have to consider leading differently. And then the culture all need to change. But this is taking on some really big assumptions, and I've kind of grown to have fun with this. So I was nervous when I did this, but I have stood in front of a room like this full of contractors who buy lots of material from Hancock Lumber, took a deep breath, and said, I don't believe the customer comes first. What I like to say today, I'm going to throw in a piece of Maine slang with this. What I like to say today is the customer comes a wicked close second. So we're super into our customers. We really are. We really like them. We value them. We listen to them. We want to be super responsive to them. And we know that our success could not be possible without them and without being valuable to them. So we're really into them. But they don't come first. They come a super close second. The people who are actually going to take care of the customer come first. And we believe as a leadership team at Hancock that if we could figure out how to nail, if you will, the employee experience, that they will create a world-class customer experience that will then create an exceptional corporate result. So the new mission is employee-centric. And this is subtle, because I used to teach Russian and Soviet history, so I am not a socialist. This is subtle. But in this model, profit becomes an outcome, not the goal. That's not to say profit's not super important, because it is super important, and we talk to everybody at Hancock Lumber about how important it is, and we measure it. But it's super important because the employee experience can't be sustained without it. And it's a super subtle but easy shift to say, let's make that the outcome, not the goal. And then you think about which mission is easier for your team to get behind. So you end up in the same place, but you just go at it from a slightly different paradigm. So now that we have a new mission, we need a new metric. We've got all kinds of metrics for profit and cash flow and return on investment and inventory shrink and AR collection days and OTIF and credits and journey value and blah, 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 blah. And it's all important. But if the mission is the employee experience, then we need a metric to measure it. And the only way to measure it would be to find a safe way to ask the employees what it's like for them. So we've started using the Best Places to Work survey, which is a national survey. It's available in almost every state in America, and it's super cheap. I think it costs us $3,500 a year. It's like crazy inexpensive. I could be wrong, but I know it's inexpensive. $3,500 a year or something like that, and every employee in the company takes a confidential online survey and answers like 80 questions about their experience. Blind, no one ever knows who says what. So here are some of the questions they answer. And they can either agree or disagree. A spirit of cooperation exists within this company. Change that affects me is communicated prior to implementation. My pay is fair. My supervisor helps me grow. Staffing levels are adequate. I feel safe at work. The company treats me like a person, not a number. And this is our score. Remember, the national average across all industries is 33%, and ours right now is 88% describe themselves as being into what they're doing. So then we need new processes. So we've got a new mission, we've got a new metric, so now we need new processes, and this is the process that we use to take the data and go deeper with employees to talk to them about what would make the employee experience better. I call it the answers to the test. Yeah, we have found that if we can create an environment that is safe, this is the big variable, where people feel like they can actually say what they think, that they will identify every big opportunity to improve the company, and they will come up with every key step to make it happen. And because they were involved in identifying the issue and identifying the remedies, they will help lead the ownership of its implementation. So then we need new leadership paradigms, and I won't take the time to go through all of these, but you can just give them a read. These are some of the key leadership skills that we're trying to use. And they represent some pretty big changes in thinking about what a manager should do. I think I would sum it up by saying this. I've tried to encourage our managers, it sounds so backwards, but I've tried to encourage our managers to spend a lot less time managing other people, and to invest more energy in working on themselves and becoming the change they would like to see in their team and within our company. Change only happens from within. We only change ourselves. We don't change others until we first change ourselves. So all of that, I believe, can create a very different culture, which brings me to a second big myth, which at first you might find confusing, because I'm a lover of people, but I don't actually think that old adage, our people makes the difference, is true, because I think great people are actually everywhere, and that phrase is an old management cop-out. I think the planet is full of great people. Every company has great people. Think about how really what we're saying to say, well, our company has the best people. So you're then by default saying the other companies in your community have people that are less best. which really isn't true. They have great people too. So what does make the difference? If great people are everywhere, if the planet's full of them, what makes the difference? The difference is culture. And history plays this out, I think, time and time again. Let's just look at 3 quick examples. Let's take Germany after World War II. Arbitrarily divided on a random line between East and West. One half of that country went on to lead the planet forward in terms of productivity and innovation and economic development and free enterprise. And one half of that country clung, held on with machine guns and barbed wire and walls and guard dogs until it collapsed under its own weight. But does anyone really think, I don't even know how you would say it, that randomly all the good Germans were in the West and the quote-unquote less good Germans were in the East? Of course not. Germany was filled with great people. It was the culture imposed by the leaders that made the difference. Take North and South Korea today. The economy of South Korea is 40 times larger than the economy of North Korea. But of course, it wasn't that all the quote-unquote good Koreans were south of the line and the less good Koreans were north of the line. Korea is filled with great people. It's the culture that makes the difference. So for us, we've been at this now for over half a decade, and for us, we could be just lucky. The economy's really good. It could be a coincidence. I get all of that, but we've had some really good outcomes, the best outcomes we've ever had, and the only reason I'm putting this slide on there is because I didn't do it. We did it. Every single person that works at our company did that. If I thought I did it, I wouldn't have been invited here and I wouldn't have shown the slide. The whole point of that slide is I didn't do it. Everybody did it. And this is my favorite metric today. So every week we get a list of openings. We have 500 positions. And last week we had 3 openings. And we've never gotten to 10. So for us, in summary, the new leadership paradigm really revolves around, I've got a book coming out next year that I mentioned, and it's essentially about the 7 lessons of the age of shared leadership. Great people are everywhere. It's culture that makes the difference. Change is created first from within by leaders working on themselves, not others. The overall strategy is to shrink the center and make the capital hard to find. The bosses are in disguise. They're tough to pick out. We're learning to listen completely differently. When I was younger, before I lost my voice, listening was for me always an exercise in getting ready to convince someone why they should think differently. And it's hard not to do that. I still break rank and get weak and do that often, but it's not what I want to do. What we're trying to do is listen only to understand. And to change the whole premise of right or wrong. When someone says something that's authentic, it's not right or wrong. It's just what they're experiencing and what they're feeling. It just is. And the whole idea is just to meet people where they are. Let them say what they think. Let them be who they are today. Because I think it's only when people feel accepted as they are do they start to let their guard down, start to gain some confidence, and start to be willing to think about new ideas. Pressuring someone is not the way to help someone grow or expand their range of possibilities. Overreaching has consequences. So the idea there is that often leaders go too far, they take too much. And the skill in the new age is restraint, which is really having the power but not using it, having the power to set the agenda but not setting it, having the power to run the meeting but not running it. It's learning to show restraint. And then the seventh learning there is what we talk about as broadening the mission. And I think this is a super exciting time to be in leadership. And I think, as funny as this sounds, that lumber companies can actually change the world. Our companies are inclined to be grounded in people. We're inclined to love people. We're inclined to be decentralized. We're inclined to be in the middle of our communities. We're actually uniquely positioned to change the world while we excel at distributing lumber and building materials. And I think that old adage, staying in your lane, is maybe not the best advice for the new century that's dawning. So this is on my right, your left, that's Verola Spider. She's a fourth-generation storyteller from the town of Porcupine on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And on your right, my left, is Catherine Grayday. She calls herself Unchi, which means grandmother. And she's from the Standing Rock Reservation where the oil pipeline protest took place a year ago. And they're two of my dearest friends in life, and they both had a huge impact on helping Hancock Lumber in Maine change, grow, evolve, and be successful. And if I had stayed in my lane, which I felt guilty about at first when I started traveling to Pine Ridge, I was like, what's everybody gonna think? And I've since been there 15 times. And many of, for me, the most valuable learnings I've acquired came from getting outside and beyond Hancock Lumber and even outside and beyond the industry. And I think in a world where everyone's related and where companies can be leaders in solving the world's biggest social challenges, getting out of our lane some becomes a necessity, not something to be avoided. So I'll close with this. There is unprecedented human vibrancy waiting to be tapped by creating organizations where everybody leads, where everybody makes decisions, where everybody feels heard. The sacred energy of the universe is dispersed. It lives in us all. That's the seventh power of Sioux, and it's old wisdom being revived for a new age. So as they say at Pine Ridge, Wopila Tonka, which means big thanks. I'm really honored to be here and appreciate being able to share some ideas and love this industry and love how many different ways there are to go about being successful. So at a conference like this, when someone shares, it isn't, I'm not sharing something that's right and I'm not sharing something that's wrong. Just sharing. And everyone picks up what helps and leaves believes, what doesn't. And that's the spirit that's been in our industry for a long time and is represented by a conference like this. It was a blessing to be here and talk, and I worked really hard to rest my voice to be able to do this with you this morning, and it makes me feel good. So thank you very much.